Hello, everybody. My name is Brennan German. I am president of Bright Talent, and we're really happy that you've joined us today for our webinar. I also have, before I introduce our special guest, I also want to introduce our head of operations, Renee Maurer. I will play facilitator, and Renee is going to play moderator in the background, handling the quick questions throughout the Q&A. We're really glad you're here. This webinar is part of a larger initiative of ours called the Rapid Change Management Series. And you can find this series on our website if you're to go to brighttalent.com. And if you're to click, I'll let it come on the screen here as Renee brings it up. So if you were to go to brighttalent.com, and if you were to click on the header at the top of the page that says Change Management, that's going to bring you to the Rapid Change Management page. So we developed this initiative because we saw an opportunity to help our HR community. We've gone through so much change over the last couple of years, and there's still lots of change happening. You know, change is the new normal. We thought there was an opportunity here to give whatever assistance we could to our community. And so this change management initiative is really separated into three parts. First, you have the Rapid Change Management Playbook that's going to give you all kinds of tips and practices and tools to help you affect change. And then we're going to have this webinar series. And this is going to be an ongoing series where we're going to have different topics, different guests, just on a really sporadic basis as soon as we find a topic we want to talk about and find a guest we want to bring on board. And then we also have our services. So if you're not necessarily wanting to do it yourself and you need some help, we are experts in the area of rapid change management and operational change. We would love to help you. So this is where you would find all that information. So in regards to this webinar, I'm a big fan of podcasts, especially when they're shorter and concise. And so I wanted to make this micro webinar format like this, so we could just talk about a couple of topics, do it in 30 minutes or less, and then give you an opportunity to do some Q&A with our special guest. And then we would just make a series of these. And so this is the format we're following. So for the first 15 minutes or so, we're going to discuss the different topics we have for today. And then we'll move into our Q&A. On this webinar function of Zoom, you can give us questions in the Q&A and just give it throughout the session. And we will ask all the questions that are given to us at the end, towards the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. And then also, if you have ideas for different topics you want to talk about, let us know that too, so we could create future webinars as well. So for today's topic, we're talking about return to work. Return to work, now what? Because there's so much that's going on. We've kind of been preparing for this time, but we don't know exactly everything that's going to be happening and when it's happening, and the pandemic is still very much in effect. And so we're trying to keep up with that. And so covering today's topic, I'm very, very excited that we have a special guest that is an expert in environmental health and safety. And her name is Lorraine Sedlak. And Lorraine's going to help us cover really three topics that really boiled to the top as we talked about return to work. One is the ergonomics of hybrid work. The second is the emotional impact of returning to work, kind of returning to a work community after having worked for a while in isolation. And then the other important thing is just maintaining your infectious disease mitigation practices. So Lorraine's background, she has over 30 years of experience providing global environmental safety and health and security leadership for Fortune 500 companies, including ITT, Stanley Black Decker, and Kimberly Clark. She's a subject matter expert in environmental health and safety compliance and program management. She's a certified safety professional, certified industrial hygienist, and a fellow of the American Industrial Hygiene Association. And throughout this pandemic, she helped lots of people put these new practices in place. So we're so excited to have you here. Thank you, Lorraine. So to cover the first topic is the ergonomics of hybrid work. So as we've kind of rehearsed, I know about ergonomics in the workplace, but I think that hopefully I'm not the only one out there, but I really haven't given much thought, and I'm sure there are others out there, about the importance of ergonomics in the home office. Maybe just kind of help us understand, and I'm going to use two words here that I think are important for HR leaders: responsibility, right? What's our responsibility? And then what's the liability? Because I'm sure there's some compliance around here. So let's tackle this first topic.
Well, ergonomics does extend to the home office. One of the things as an employer, you are responsible for making sure that employees understand how to ergonomically set up their workstation. That could be anything from the position of the keyboard to the type of mouse to the height of the monitor. So there are specific guidelines out there that are readily available. And we have some addendum that we've added to this series that'll help you with that. But something as simple as an employee who sits in front of their monitor, if it's not set up correctly, they could be straining their neck, they could be straining their shoulders. If they're keying rapidly and they have the wrong type of keyboard, or they're pounding on the keyboard too heavily, they could have wrist issues or elbow issues. So you really want to give your employees guidelines on how to set up their workstation ergonomically. Unfortunately, in this work from home for the last 2 years, you've seen pictures of people working on their couch, working on their kitchen table, working in a laundry closet, because it's the only place they could get some privacy. But this is obviously people are not ergonomically set up. So you need to have some type of checklist and training program that you provide your employees. You should have a written training program, written ergonomics program. Not only is it a good thing to have, in California, there is a standard, it's repetitive motion injuries in Title 8 that says you have to have an ergonomic program. So there is both the let's reduce the risk and harm to our employees, but also a regulatory requirement. And if an employee is keying rapidly for long periods of time, not taking rest breaks, and when employers hear about rest breaks, they think, oh, I have to go away for 20 minutes and walk around the block. No, it's really stop what you're doing, stretch, look away from your monitor, give your muscles and your eyes a little bit of rest. So it's very important that they understand those basics. I have had instances where employees have filed cumulative trauma injuries for their wrists. And it'd be best to be able to avoid those type of claims, but they do happen. And they usually happen with people with repetitive keying.
And so that you're bringing up several good points. I mean, most of us want to be good stewards, right? We want to be good leaders. We want to make strong recommendations that they make sure they take care of themselves at home in the same way we're trying to do and set up the offices at work. So but we don't want to be big brother either, which you shared with me. There is technology you could be, but I think the majority of us hopefully don't need to do that. So maybe what is a best practice to, and I think you might have touched on this, but maybe an example of a best practice where we can encourage them to take that break or put that practice in place so it becomes a behavior and they know it.
There's actually software programs out there that will remind you. They will, I guess they count the keystrokes, or I'm not sure how they work, but they will say, time to take a break, look away, stretch. So that kind of reminds employees that we're really not meant to be keying all day. And the other problem you have with a lot of your work from home individuals, they're using their laptop keyboard, which for people with large hands, they're hunched over and they're keying. And that is really the worst thing you can do. A laptop was meant for just a very limited usage period of time, not for a full day's work. So that you really should be giving your employees a keyboard, a full-size keyboard, even when they're traveling. A lot of employers now provide something other than, and as you look at the new laptops, they're getting smaller and smaller.
Right.
So it really is to your benefit, really simple things. And from a standpoint of setting up the workstation, you may have to buy a different mouse or a different keyboard, but even the height of the workstation, I tell people you don't have to spend a lot of money. Use a book, raise it up so it's at the eye level. So there are things you can do that will cost an investment. Some will not. So I think as an employer, it's in your best interest to do that.
Very good information. And let me share, once we upload the recording of this video, we will have, Lorraine has provided us like over a dozen different tools, such as different posters, as well as different diagrams of what that might look like. So after you watch this, you'll have the chance to see the uploaded video, and then we'll have links to these tools that you can use for free. So thanks for providing those, Lorraine. Now, we talked about the ergonomics. So great, we set up the perfect workstation in our office, perhaps our home office, but now we're going to come back. A lot of companies are coming back to at least a hybrid approach where they're expecting their employees to be in the office now, back in their work community. And I think it's really important, and you've read several articles and you turned me on to those articles, we can't just simply say, okay, great, let's come back.
Yeah.
Let's just come back out of whatever situation we've been kind of changed our behavior to work in for the last 2.5 years. And now we're coming back. And that really needs to be, there needs to be some thought put into bringing the workforce back. And that's just on a physical or, like we're changing our actual office environments, but really on an emotional basis, we've got to set that up so we allow our employees this kind of transition back and not just a black and white start, here you go. So maybe share a little bit about, especially what you've been seeing and reading out there.
Yeah, and when I started looking for articles on returning to work after COVID, and interestingly enough, most of them are written in 2021. We all thought we were going to be back, and we weren't. But the two things that come out, there was a Harvard Business Review article, and there was a McKinsey study. And the two things came out, the employees are most concerned about their safety and flexibility. We have now set the stage for working at home. Yes. So to come back with an absolute no, you can no longer work at home, you're most likely going to lose some key employees. So the real issue is whatever that transition plan is going to be, it needs to be well thought out. And you really should engage your employees who've been working from home to help build that plan. So as you know, if an employee is engaged in the decision making, you're going to have a lot less resistance. But something like some employers are actually saying, I don't need all this office space. So they're going to a very old concept called hoteling, where if I bring employees in, if they need a workstation, they can reserve it on Outlook. They can reserve a meeting room on Outlook. And you can say, okay, we understand that you're used to this flexible environment. So, okay, you come to work Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and that's group A, and group B does Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Fridays you flip. But that allows people the flexibility that they're used to, and it's also saying we trust you, and right. They are part of the decision making. I think if you take a hard and fast stance, it's not going to work. And what reminds me of all this is, and Brendan and I have been talking about this, if you see that Amazon commercial for recruiting, and at first I was really stepped back and said, really? But you've got employees saying, I can only work these hours. I can only, I need to go, you need to pay for my schooling, and it goes on and on. And 2 years ago, he said, are you nuts?
Right.
But they are seeing exactly what the rest of the world are seeing, that the employees are used to something different. They know they can work remotely and be productive. So to shut the door on that, you're going to lose good people. Now, on the mental health issue, one thing that in the articles I read, they talked about some employees have been through a horrible time with COVID. They've lost loved ones. They've been sick. Some of them may have long haulers syndrome. You need to allow employees time to talk about that together. Not only talk about the funny things that happen, like the dog or the cat that walked around the screen and you saw their tail as you were having a Zoom meeting, but what they were feeling, so they can get reconnected, because they have, even though you have Zoom, you don't have that emotional connection. So allow them, when they're on site, to have some time to talk to each other.
I think that's important, and what would be, I think, critical, especially for organizations, depending on how many employees you have. That's probably not a forum that your typically trained leader or manager is prepared to lead that kind of conversation. So you might even consider, a mental health trained professional that can lead these conversations in a safe way and in a way people are feeling heard and listened to. And it's almost like just in different employee groups that we do with that allow different people to come together, talk about it, because they're going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so you might as well create the outlet, create the space for them to talk about it, which talks about the other things. So we talk about productivity too.
Yes.
So what I learned in that article you provided is that productivity, you're going to watch productivity change, because when we're working at home, we're really in a lot of ways, depending on if you have small children or not, or lots of pets, but you could focus for longer periods of time than you can in the office. So productivity is going to be a little different. And especially it's like almost being away for summer and you're coming back to school and you've got all this social energy you want to get out. So I read in that article that when we're in a working office, especially an open environment like that, we're interrupted almost every 3 minutes. And then for some of us like me that take a while to get focused again, it can take up to 20 minutes to get focused again. So we do have to be aware of that too. And so there's some companies that have put different programs in place that allow you to turn off your email or turn off the phone for a half a day so you can focus, so you can maintain some of that productivity gain you might have had at home. So I thought that was really good feedback coming out of that article as well. Awesome. So as we move through this topic, so great. We're handling, the return to work. We're handling the emotional side of work, but we still have a pandemic. We're still in a pandemic. And then also what I'm learning and seeing is, as some of my colleagues, professional colleagues that are traveling again, the common cold is back, right? The normal flu is back. So they're getting sick like we used to normally. And so we've got to think about that as we come back to work. We can't slack on the infectious disease mitigation practices we put in place. So maybe share a little bit about that and maybe some tips.
Well, you remember we talked about the employees' concern in returning to work were flexibility and safety, and your COVID protocols offer that safety net for employees. So I highly recommend that you continue to take temperatures, you continue to go through the COVID questionnaire with every employee, you continue to enforce with your employees, don't come to work sick. We don't want you to get, we don't want everyone in the workplace to get sick, but most importantly, you need to get well before you come to work. Make sure you're keeping the hand sanitizers around, you're promoting hand washing, you're promoting disinfection. I wouldn't make sure you have supplies of disinfecting wipes and the hand gels, everything you've had with under the existing standards. And on that note, don't forget that even though some cities and counties may change, you still have your local health department that may require you to still have those protocols. And added to that, the COVID prevention plan, emergency temporary standard from Cal OSHA, is supposed to expire, I think, April 14th, but the governor signed an executive order saying that they could extend it to the end of this year, that they didn't have to go through the normal record keeping or review process. So it may still be out there, but regardless of whether it's required or not, it's good practice. And it says to your employees that you care, you want to keep the workplace clean. To that point, if employees are coming back to work, make sure you clean the whole office. Dust may have created, it's like setting the table for a return to work party. People want a clean, bright workplace. So don't neglect, I mean, if you haven't changed your filters or you haven't cleaned the workstations or you've got desks that have dust on them, let's make sure that that's clean. It's a welcoming environment. But it goes to that psychological well-being of my employer cares about my safety. And at the same time, if you continue these protocols, you may mitigate or reduce the potential for the common cold too.
Great point. And then again, going back to that theme of responsibility or liability on the part of the employer. And then let's talk about masks. So, we went from something that was a benign PPE coverage, right, that you would typically not see in the workplace. It's now become something more than what it is. And I think to your point, it is the responsibility of the company to provide an environment where all employees feel safe. Those that don't care to wear a mask now versus those that still prefer to wear a mask. And so maybe talk a little bit about the respect and responsibility that the employer should show.
Absolutely. The first thing I would strongly recommend is you do not make a distinction between employees wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. If that makes them feel better, it shouldn't be a contest. It should be, respect that decision, but make sure they're wearing the right type of face covering. I mean, CDC has guidelines on the face coverings. It's, no gaiters, no scarves, no bandanas, multi-layered fabric for your mask, or you can give them a surgical mask or a KN95. If you give them an N95, that's a respirator, and there's a whole different set of issues that tie with that. And a minimum, you have to at least fit test them and make sure they understand the risks and hazards of wearing a respirator. But again, I would not discourage employees from wearing masks. And if you go out I've been shopping and I still see a mixed bag of people wearing masks,
right,
not wearing masks. So it should become a normal expectation. There's no right or wrong answer, but don't make it, an issue with with all the employees. They need to accept it, that's a personal decision, and respect it.
I think it's really important. It's very much a cultural type of initiative where I think the employer needs to really set that tone up front. And more importantly, don't slack, because who knows if there's another variant, and you don't want to be the employer that is the one that looks like you're not keeping your folks healthy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So Renee, we're going to move to our Q&A section now. So thank you for hearing everybody's questions and taking those. So do we have our first question?
We do. We have a few here. So our first question is, we have some employees requesting to work out of state. Is this common? And how are companies handling these requests?
So out of state, well, this goes, I'm not going to speak for Lorraine here. Let me just speak in generalities. Working out of state is obviously a remote, hybrid, or on-site question. So there's really three options here as an employer. And you'll have to decide, as Lorraine was saying, in talking about recruiting talent, you'll have to decide if you are an on-site only organization, meaning you're not going to offer a hybrid or remote option, or if you're hybrid. So if they're on-site, Renee, that means they probably need to live near the office, right, to commute in. If they're hybrid, the same goes. They're coming on-site a couple of days a week, 3 days a week. They need to be close enough to commute in. If you're talking about full remote opportunity, sure, then they could probably live anywhere as long as that's okay with the employer. So you do have a very interesting scenario that we haven't necessarily had before, where you have had people move away during COVID. And as organizations, if they actually change their policy, you could be isolating or alienating some of those people, and you might lose them. So it really is up to the employer. What is your call on the type of talent that you're trying to retain and trying to keep? And I think that will help you adjust your policy.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that, if they've been working remotely for the past few years, it's going to be really hard to justify why all of a sudden they need to come back into an office.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Okay, great, thank you. So our next question is, there's the study fact of 3 minutes interrupted in office. Have there been any types of studies showing anything like that for a home study? Any study on virtual production versus in the office? I think we kind of touched on that earlier.
Yeah, the reason that even came to my mind, it was written in the article around coming back to the workplace. So there's studies and information there. I know I don't have it readily on top of my head to share the data, but I know there is some data out there about productivity at home. However, I think it's largely situational, as Lorraine was alluding to. Sometimes you've got a working mother that's got to go in the closet to find focus. I don't know if they're going to be that much more productive than being in an office where she's not being interrupted or he's not being interrupted by children. So I think it just depends on the situation. But I will say, from my personal experience, between working from home to working in an office, a lot of times I was far more productive and focused at home than I was in an office setting because of the interruptions.
And I would add to that, from my personal experience, if you are, at least in my office, sometimes my husband has to come in and say, "Are you going to have lunch?" Because you get so focused that you forget, you lose track of time. There are companies, which I'm not a proponent for it, but they actually have keyboard, they monitor the keystrokes. Now, I would think that would be a big brother that employees would have a problem with. But when you talk about productivity, in my mind, is you should have an idea of the magnitude of the work product that you expect. So productivity aside, no matter if it takes them 8 hours or 10 hours, if they're doing their job and they're meeting your productivity goals, why would you worry about whether virtual was more productive than in the office? To me, it's what goals have you established? And more importantly, are the managers having interaction with these employees and following them and tracking their progress?
Great point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next question is, obviously COVID isn't gone. So the question comes out, when you get it, should you slow down to not working for 10 days like they initially stated? And should you continue with the contact tracing?
Okay.
I'll let you touch that, Lorraine. I'm reading all the latest guidelines.
Well, I think if employees test positive, it doesn't mean they're sick. if they are sick, then they should not be working. They need to take time to get better. Now they've changed the guidelines to allow you to come back to work earlier after 5 days if you test negative. So that's one issue. And what was the second question? I'm sorry, I lost that.
Continue contact tracing.
Oh, well, the employer, if they're virtually working, that's not an issue. But if they're at work, absolutely, you need it. That has not changed at all. And you want to do it as an employer anyway, because you want to make sure that other employees understand that there may be an exposure. But again, contact tracing is 15 minutes of exposure over a period of time. It's now cumulative exposure. It used to be one time 15 minutes. Now, if you have 5 minutes of contact and another 5 minutes later, another 5 minutes later, that's 15 minutes of close contact. So if they're in the workplace, absolutely. And again, you're required by your public health agencies, and just from a standpoint of keeping your employees safe both at work and home, yeah, you want to know about that contact tracing. You don't know whether that employee working at home interacts with some of your employees on the floor or who are at work.
You know, my wife and I were just talking about this, the old mentality of, I've got to work, even if I feel sick, I've got to come into work and just show I'm doing a good job and working through it, right? That is now off the table. Do not come in sick at all. Work from home. Don't try to show your allegiance or your loyalty by being sick and coming to the office. That's not a wise choice.
And even if they're working remotely, I wouldn't encourage them to work if they're sick. If they've got a fever and they're coughing and they're having difficulty, breathing, well, you shouldn't be working. Allow yourself time to repair and get better.
Great point.
So kind of in addition to that question, or an add-on, should there be a corporate policy, and can Bright Talent help develop it if we don't have one?
So the short answer is yes. We can help you build policies and practices, absolutely. Lorraine, about actual policy to say if you're sick, stay at home. I'm sure that is a policy. I don't remember ever writing in an employee handbook. Maybe it's there. I don't know. But now I haven't written an employee handbook in 2 years, right, or more. So what is the policy now? I mean, that's a great question. Actually scripting a policy to stay home if you're sick.
I think it's been implied, but not enforced.
Sure.
And to your point, there's a lot of employees who want to play hero and continue working. But it, as part of COVID, in the standard, absolutely says do not come to work sick. And that's part of the attestation they should be making if they're going to come on site. Do you have a fever greater than 1.4? Have you a sore throat, runny nose, loss of smell, the whole 9 yards? I don't know if you need, I think from a COVID standpoint, absolutely have to have a policy. As an employer, it makes sense. Do you want people working sick in the workplace?
Again, that responsibility versus liability, regardless of perhaps compliance, it seems to be the right thing to do. So great point.
Okay, well, that wraps up our questions.
Awesome. All right, well, then that wraps up the webinar. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Lorraine, again, for joining us and just providing your deep expertise with us. So as mentioned at the beginning, as I was saying, we're going to record this. We're going to upload it to our website. If you're an attendee today, you'll actually get an email notifications when it's uploaded. Otherwise, it will also stay in that webinar page on our website as something you could come back to at any given time to watch and even get the tools that are downloadable. So also, please reach out to us directly. If you have other topics you want to cover and you want us to go find an expert in that area and we'll cover that, we'd be happy to do so. And then just also be on the lookout for our next webinar and the next topic we'll cover. So with that, thank you again, everybody. Have a great day.